Water is supposed to protect a city, not destroy it. But in 2005, New Orleans learned the hard way what happens when infrastructure fails at the worst possible moment. Consider this, a major US city surrounded by water, relying on an aging levee system to hold back disaster. When Hurricane Katrina hit, it wasn't just the storm that devastated New Orleans. It was the catastrophic collapse of those very barriers meant to protect it. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed overnight, thousands were stranded on rooftops, and the city itself became an apocalyptic wasteland. But here's the chilling part. This wasn't just a natural disaster. Studies later confirmed that many of the levees failed due to poor design and inadequate maintenance. The very walls meant to keep people safe had been neglected for decades, and the consequences? Nearly 80% of the city flooded. Over 1,800 lives were lost, and billions of dollars in damages that the city is still recovering from today. Like a crumbling dam holding back an ocean, New Orleans' levee system was a disaster waiting to happen. And the worst part? It was preventable. Looking back, this failure serves as a brutal lesson. Urban planning isn't just about roads and buildings, it's about survival. Have we truly learned from this? Or are other cities just waiting for history to repeat itself? A city of innovation, wealth, and opportunity, yet thousands sleep on the streets every night. How did San Francisco, one of the richest cities in the world, become ground zero for a housing crisis that seems impossible to fix? In the 1970s, an average middle-class worker could afford a home in San Francisco. Fast forward to today, and even six-figure earners struggle to rent a one-bedroom apartment. Doesn't that just sound absurd? The reason? A perfect storm of restrictive zoning laws, skyrocketing demand, and a tech boom that sent property values through the roof. But here's the real issue. While billion-dollar startups thrive, the working class is being priced out. Longtime residents are forced to leave, homelessness has surged, and entire neighborhoods have transformed into playgrounds for the ultra-rich. Essential workers, teachers, nurses, service employees can't afford to live where they work, pushing the city toward an economic and social breaking point. Like a pressure cooker with a faulty release valve, San Francisco's housing market keeps tightening, with no real relief in sight. City leaders debate solutions, rent control, new developments, tax incentives, but progress is slow and frustration is growing. So here's the real question. If one of the wealthiest cities on earth can't solve its housing crisis, what hope do the rest of us have? A city with glittering skyscrapers, wide boulevards, and high-rise apartments, but no people. What if a metropolis was built for millions, yet remained eerily empty? This isn't the plot of a dystopian film. It's the reality of China's ghost cities. Over the past 2 decades, China has constructed entire urban landscapes at an unprecedented speed, driven by economic ambition and speculative real estate investment. But there's a problem. Many of these cities remain largely uninhabited. Towering apartment complexes stand vacant, shopping malls echo with silence, and highways lead to nowhere. Why does this happen? Local governments, eager for economic growth, invested heavily in real estate development, but demand never caught up. Homes were bought not to be lived in, but as speculative investments, creating a bubble of unoccupied buildings. And the consequences? Billions of dollars are tied up in empty infrastructure, while rural migrants and low-income workers still struggle to afford housing. Like monuments to miscalculated ambition, these ghost cities serve as a warning. Rapid development without real demand can lead to economic instability. Historically, unchecked housing bubbles have triggered financial crisis. So will China's ghost cities eventually fill up, or will they become relics of an unsustainable boom? Visualize a setting where the echo of the gondolier's songs is drowned out by the song of relentless waves. Narrow alleys, once bustling with merchants and artists, are now filled with hurried tourists, while the very foundations beneath them weaken with each passing tide. For centuries, Venice thrived as a beacon of trade, art, and culture. Its canals and architecture drew visitors from around the world, marveling at its unique charm and historical significance. But today, it faces an existential crisis. Rising sea levels, unchecked tourism, and environmental neglect have all turned this floating masterpiece into a sinking disaster. Can you even imagine a world where Venice no longer exists? The consequences are already visible. Historic buildings crumble as saltwater erodes their foundations. St. Mark's Square, once a grand gathering place, now floods so frequently that elevated walkways have become a necessity. Meanwhile, the city's population dwindles as locals are priced out, their homes converted into tourist rentals. Like a sandcastle against the tide, Venice's survival seems uncertain. Efforts like the Most Flood Barrier Protect aim to protect it, but are they enough? In the shadow of history, Venice serves as a reminder of what happens when urban planning fails to adapt. Reflecting on this crisis, one question lingers. Will Venice be saved, or will it become a cautionary tale of a city swallowed by the seas? Consider a project so riddled with delays, mismanagement, and technical failures that it became an international embarrassment. That's the story of the Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, a massive infrastructure project meant to symbolize Germany's efficiency, but instead became a cautionary tale of what happens when urban planning goes disastrously wrong. Originally set to open in 2011, the airport faced over a decade of delays due to poor planning, corruption, and construction defects. Fire safety systems that didn't work, escalators that were too short, and even hundreds of miles of mislabeled cables. The list of blunders was endless. Can you believe that at one point, officials discovered that the airport had too few check-in counters, but too many escalators? The consequences were severe. Berlin's outdated Tegel and Schönefeld Airport had to continue operating past their limits, frustrating passengers and airlines. Meanwhile, costs skyrocketed from an initial estimate of 2 billion euros to over 7 billion euros. Like a house of cards, each failed deadline triggered another layer of chaos, leaving taxpayers footing the bill for a project that seemed cursed from the start. In the shadow of other successful European airports, Berlin-Brandenburg stands as a reminder of how even the most well-funded projects can crumble under mismanagement. As cities plan for the future, one question still remains: how do we prevent history from repeating itself? Imagine a city protected by a massive, state-of-the-art flood defense system, only to realize that it might not be strong enough. That's the unsettling reality of the Thames barrier, once hailed as a marvel of engineering, now struggling against the very forces it was designed to hold back. Built in the 1980s, the Thames barrier was meant to shield London from catastrophic flooding, a problem the city has faced for centuries. At the time, experts believed it would remain effective until at least 2030. But here's the problem. Climate change has accelerated rising sea levels, and the barrier is being used far more frequently than expected. In the 1980s, it was only closed 4 times a year. Now, it's shutting down dozens of times annually. Can you believe that? The consequences are alarming. If the barrier fails or becomes obsolete, London could face devastating floods, threatening millions of residents and billions in infrastructure damages. Like a dam with cracks forming under pressure, the city's defenses are being pushed to their limits, and yet a long-term solution remains uncertain. In the shadow of history, the Thames barrier struggles serve as a warning. Urban planning must adapt faster than the threats it faces. Will London act before it's too late? Picture a futuristic city where sleek monorails glide effortlessly above bustling streets, promising a new era of urban transport. Now, imagine that same system becoming an expensive failure, dismantled just 25 years after its grand debut. That's exactly what happened with the Sydney Monorail, a transport project that was supposed to revolutionize the city, but instead ended up as a cautionary tale in urban planning. Opened in 1988, the monorail was meant to connect Sydney's business district, Darling Harbour, and entertainment hubs, offering a quick and scenic alternative to buses and trains. But there was a major flaw. The route was too limited. Instead of integrating into the wider public transport network, it became a costly tourist attraction rather than a practical commuting solution. Can you believe a city would invest millions into a system that barely served its residents? The consequences were inevitable. Ridership remained low, maintenance costs soared, and by 2013, the government pulled the plug. Like a roller coaster that no one wanted to ride, the Sydney Monorail went from a futuristic vision to an obsolete relic. Looking back, this failure highlights a key lesson. Urban transport must be built for functionality, not novelty. So what if Sydney had focused on integrating its public transport instead of chasing a futuristic dream? Perhaps the monorail wouldn't have become a symbol of poor planning and wasted potential. Think of an airport so modern and ambitious that it was meant to be Spain's next major transport hub, only to end up as an empty ghost terminal within a few years. This is the story of Ciudad Real Central Airport, a billion-dollar infrastructure project that went from a grand vision to one of the biggest aviation failures in Europe. Opened in 2008, the airport was designed to handle millions of passengers annually, easing congestion from Madrid's Barajas Airport. But there was just one problem. Almost no one needed it. Located over 200 kilometers from Madrid, it lacked high-speed rail connections or strong airline partnerships. Can you imagine building an international airport in the middle of nowhere and expecting it to thrive? The consequences were disastrous. With barely any flights, the airport quickly fell into financial ruin, and by 2012, it was forced to shut down. Its futuristic terminal, long runways, and control towers stood eerily empty. An abandoned billion-dollar project left as a testament to poor planning. This wasn't just a bad investment, it was a reminder that infrastructure must serve actual demand, not political ambition. What if the funds had been used to improve existing transport hubs instead of chasing an overhyped dream? Perhaps Ciudad Real Central wouldn't be known today as Spain's most infamous airport failure. Which urban planning failure story impacted you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if you'd like to see a part 3 exploring more urban planning failures. Join us next time as we delve deeper into the events that have shaped our cities, because every urban planning has a story worth telling.